Doing my PhD was one of the hardest things that I ever did, but also one of the most profound and deep experiences that I've had in my life. And so I found my PhD thesis, and I thought I would use audio narration by an AI voice to listen to what I wrote 25 years ago. I would say it's almost 26 years ago that I completed my PhD, and it's quite amazing to listen back to it, and I'm hoping you might enjoy it as well. I've cut the PhD into parts, chapter by chapter, as it's quite heavy going. I talk in long sentences, or I write in long sentences, so it can be a bit of a challenge. I've tried also to include images that are relevant to what I'm talking about, but it is a very quick and crude video, mainly because I'm actually more interested in listening to myself and thinking about the ideas that I came up with 25 years ago. So I'm hoping you will enjoy it.
Understanding public perceptions of environmental and health risks, and integrating them into the environmental impact assessment, siting, and planning process, using the case study of the siting of a waste transfer station. This research is undertaken as part of the degree of Doctor of Philosophy by Salim Dore, supervised by Simon Carter, Helen Dalk, and Daniel Osborne, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, 2000. Acknowledgements. Many people have helped and supported me on my philosophical journey over the last 3.5 years. They have enhanced the positive and insightful aspects and reduced the vague and wrong-headed features of my thesis. In particular, I would like to express my deep and sincere thanks to my first supervisor and personal tutor during my MSc in Environmental Epidemiology, Professor Helen Dalk. Without her help, support, and faith in me, I would not have been able to develop my research topic and win the ESR scholarship. She has been and continues to be a friend and mentor. Equal thanks and appreciation go to Dr. Simon Carter, my current supervisor, who bought me coffees and lunches and took me on as a student without a moment's hesitation. To Simon, I owe a great debt of gratitude for getting me through my upgrading unscathed, listening to my ideas and issues, making astute suggestions, allowing me to follow my own intuitions, and for being a colleague, friend, as well as a constructively challenging supervisor. Dr. Daniel Osborne, my NERC supervisor, deserves no less credit and recognition for supporting my EASULIC scholarship application, reading my work, being there when I have needed to talk to him, and for quietly and consistently supporting my ideas and approach. Heartfelt thanks goes to all the residents and professionals who took the time to type to me and help develop my understanding of the risk issues during the siting of a WTS. I would also like to thank 2 other members of staff, Dr. Judy Green, for critically reading my thesis and providing some perceptive and meaningful comments, and Professor Gil Wall for being around and about, acting on my ideas to develop an active research degree community that shared and cared for each other, and for supporting the many social events that I organized on behalf of the LSHTM research student community. I am also grateful to the Economic and Social Research Council and the Natural Environment Research Council for their financial and educational support. Finally, I want to say thanks to all my friends, and in particular, Omer, Jacob, Najib, Jirachi, Jonkol, Dwangtip, and Charles. To Omer for his wise counsel on life, to Jacob for critically and smartly reading my thesis not once but twice, to Brenda for reading a key fieldwork chapter, to Najib for his unfailing support and for the drinks, food, and companionship, to Hirachi for being the wise Brazilian, to John Cole and Dwangtip for listening to me and always being the first to cook and help organize at our student parties, and to Charles for listening with patience and perspicacity to my early ideas. You have given me laughter, joy, and camaraderie to what was at regular intervals a lonely and dispiriting journey. You have been a beacon of light when the journey was at its darkest. Cheers, mates. Preface. This thesis describes 2 journeys. At a personal level, this thesis and the associated research has been a record of my journey as a researcher moving from a natural science perspective, medicine and environmental epidemiology, towards a more sociological outlook. This has influenced both the way I undertook my fieldwork as well as the final structure of my thesis, leading to a tone and viewpoint that has moved me away from my quantitative understanding of risks towards a more qualitative understanding. Furthermore, this duality and tension is reflected in the way this thesis is written, with the quieter realist voice echoing the louder social constructionist tone of the arguments that are developed. This thesis therefore hopes to evoke a similar journey in its non-sociological audience, risk expert professionals, by developing a unified perspective and approach that will make sense to risk expert professionals, planning officials, civil servants, and environmental and health professionals who tend to have a natural science, quantitative, and largely positivistic perspective. This is exemplified in planning processes by the use of impact assessments, environmental impact assessments, health impact assessments, and social impact assessments that are based on quantitative risk assessment approaches and are framed in rationalistic ways to manage and contain the potential dangers that developments may expose residents to. Risk is complex because at a basic level it means danger and the possibility of being exposed to danger, but at another level, some would say a higher or deeper level, is associated with many different things, including people's personal and professional experiences of danger and of social and social and cultural institutions, especially those that are seen to have a remit to protect lay publics from risks. It can stand for and have embedded within it a whole set of issues about personal and social identities, relationships, and processes. Technical and socio-cultural definitions and understandings of risks come together and depart from this point of interconnection. While technical approaches aim to prove the existence of a danger and attempt to quantify it in physical terms, the type of health effects, and the number of people likely to be affected, for sociological and anthropological perspectives, the important issue is to unpack the notion of risk and uncover the social and cultural issues and concerns that are and become embedded within it. The challenge this thesis takes up is to create a perspective that is accessible for risk professionals with a pragmatic focus, wanting to understand and deal with public concerns and make societal decisions in a context of limited resources. This thesis has developed arguments with this framing in mind, and therefore in some areas has not explored themes and issues in a deeply theoretical or sociological way, as a deliberate attempt to ensure that it remains accessible to both realists as well as social constructionist readers. It synthesizes the key risk understandings and allows risk professionals to understand lay public's perceptions of risks in a coherent way, as well as acting as a gateway for them to access the wider sociological and anthropological literature on risk issues. Specifically, it explores the microarena of a local planning process and what risk means at this level. It starts from the notion that risk issues in planning processes are used in a boundarified and distinct context with the general aim of increasing the positives and reducing the negatives of any proposed development for the community as a whole. It argues that in this micro-context, an approach can be developed that allows sociological and anthropological understandings and approaches to be used to reduce conflict and improve cooperation and consensus in planning processes, and so lead to better social policies and decisions. Summary of the thesis. Community concerns and protests at the siting of technological facilities in their neighborhoods have increasingly been recognized as important social phenomena. However, environmental impact assessments (EIAs) undertaken during the planning process have tended to show that the environmental and health risks of these facilities are low. This disjunction in expert in my discourse has been pejoratively described as NIMBYism, not in my backyardism. More importantly, it has led to a risk perception gap developing between key stakeholders, especially residents and risk professionals. That in turn is having four wider societal consequences: a trust credibility gap, a knowledge communication gap, a values ethics gap, and a democratic accountability gap. This thesis describes a qualitative study exploring this issue during the siting and planning process for a waste transfer station in an urban neighborhood in London, England. It shows that individuals and communities are intuitive, emotional, imaginative, and reasoned in their responses to such siting processes. In effect, they seem to be undertaking a wider, largely qualitative, form of risk and hazard assessment that takes into account their own personal and professional experiences, as well as long-term social, economic, and political factors. The specific objectives will describe how each stakeholder group perceived the risks and develop an understanding of why stakeholders held these risk worldviews. A community profile, a systematic review of written public comments, in-depth interviews with residents and expert professionals, as well as observation of public meetings, and some local media and document analyses were undertaken. A conceptual framework for understanding residents' and other stakeholders' concerns was developed. This framework argues that there are three key strands to understanding stakeholders' worldviews in these settings: direct, process, and symbolic concerns. While risk experts and EIAs deal reasonably well with the direct environmental, health, and economic concerns of potential developments, they deal poorly with the process and symbolic concerns that communities have. The direct concerns involve issues relating directly to the facility and its operation in the neighborhood. The process concerns involve issues about the openness and participatory nature of the siting and planning process, such as having enough information and time to make an informed judgment, as well as having a controlling influence on the decisions made during the process. The symbolic concerns involve three core issues: power, values, and identity. Power involves questions of who has power to affect residents. Is their accumulation and exercise of power seen as legitimate, and are they seen to be using their power appropriately? Values involves moral and ethical questions about fairness, equity, transparency, respecting people, and the importance of experiential knowledge. Finally, identity takes account of how the personal and community identities of residents interact with the professional identities of experts, specifically how the siting impacts on perceptions of and ideals about home and neighborhood. The study points to the need for experts, professionals, the planning process, and EIAs to incorporate the process and symbolic concerns that residents and other stakeholders have, by explicitly incorporating the concerns of residents and other stakeholders into EIAs, as well as information on important social, political, and cultural factors at the local level. Conflict and mistrust between stakeholders could be reduced. It could also turn EIAs into strategic policy and planning resources that allow policy and decision makers to better understand local issues and enable them to make better informed policies and decisions, locally and nationally.